Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be talking all about 100k run preparation. So whether you've signed up for a 100-kilometer ultramarathon, or you're just going to do a 100k solo run or some kind of virtual 100k event, this video is going to help you. And we're talking all about race preparation in terms of mindset, gear, and just strategies for how to prepare. In this video we're not going to be talking about training for an ultramarathon. I've covered that in other resources which I'll link to below and you can check out my profile. But really today we're talking about prep. And prep is super important when it comes to ultramarathons because, as I'm going to cover, in an ultramarathon anything that can happen will happen. So guys, this video I'm specifically covering 100k, but really the principles I'm going to describe you can apply to almost any length of ultramarathon. Okay, so why did I choose to make a video about 100k race preparation? Basically, the truth is that 5 or 6 days ago, I went and ran a solo 100k. It's actually the first time in a few years that I've done this distance, and it really made me revisit a lot of the material and how to prepare properly, made me start to think about what could go wrong, and basically how to guarantee myself the best chances of success, finishing strongly, and actually finishing. So to me, that's what an ultramarathon is all about. When it comes to ultramarathons, you don't want to think too hard about finishing time, your target pace, or who you're going to beat, or your position in the rankings. An ultramarathon, so many things can go wrong that just finishing it is basically the goal in itself. So let's jump in. Okay guys, the first point to raise is to mention Murphy's Law. So Murphy's Law basically says whatever can happen will happen. And this is especially true for ultramarathons because you're out there for so long, running for so long, and you've got so much gear, so much different things that could go wrong or affect your run, that it's all in the planning. It's all about contingency planning. This is much more true for ultramarathons than it is for, say, half marathons or marathons or shorter distance events. The reason is basically with shorter distance events, you've got a better idea how it's going to go if you've trained properly. They're shorter, so you're out there for longer, for less time. And 3, they're kind of better supported usually. A half marathon, you're always around other people. You might be in a city or a town. And if something goes wrong in a half marathon or a marathon, you can often walk to the finish line or even just walk to the next aid station and get help. In an ultramarathon, if you've got a problem at kilometer 25 of a 100k race, then that problem's going to be with you for the next 75 kilometers if you can last that long. So the whole idea with ultramarathon prep is to think in terms of Murphy's Law, what could go wrong, and then mitigate against it in your planning. Okay guys, point number 2 is be humble. So when we're talking about being humble, we're talking about your expectations in terms of pace, your expectations in terms of your finishing time and your ranking, and how the race is going to go in general. Because as I've just mentioned, in ultramarathons, anything can happen. So how can we apply this to our race strategy? Basically, you don't want to have too fixed an idea about how your race is going to go. You've got to almost anticipate that the race might have problems and do what you can to mitigate against it. And one of the best ways to mitigate against having problems during a 100k run is to run conservatively. So what do I mean when I say run conservatively? Basically, when I advise people about ultramarathons, especially if it's your first ultramarathon or you've only run 1 or 2 before, don't think about speed. Don't think about a target pace that you're trying to match or a finishing time that you're trying to meet. Instead, think in terms of rate of perceived exertion. In other words, think of how hard you're pushing yourself at every moment while you run. Basically, you want to aim for around like a 5 or 6 out of 10 in terms of exertion. You always want to be running your ultramarathon at a sort of conservative, conversational pace. So one in which while you're running, you could have a conversation with someone running next to you. If you're going up a hill, you don't want to be pushing yourself hard or down a hill for that matter. You might be able to do it. Your cardiovascular system might be telling you, yeah, we can run up the hill, but you're putting extra stress on your legs, which later on in the race is gonna come back to haunt you. So the whole idea behind success in an ultramarathon is being conservative from the start. And that's going to carry you forward all the way to the finish, because if you're conservative, your legs are more relaxed, you don't expend so much energy, so it just carries you through. So as I say, my general advice is aim for a conservative rate of perceived exertion. If you feel you're pushing yourself during your ultramarathon, you're probably going too hard. Definitely with the last, say, 20 kilometers, if you feel you're definitely going to finish, then you can open up the throttle a little bit and go a bit harder. But I would definitely advise for the first 80 kilometers, you've got to think with those last 20 kilometers in mind. It's almost like you want to think about your first 80 kilometers as preparation for those last 20, right? So your goal might be, I want to get to the 80 kilometer point in the best condition possible. That's the way you finish an ultramarathon. It's not through running a predefined pace. It's not through trying to match somebody else's time. It's all about being conservative and keeping yourself in as good shape as possible so you get to the finish line. Okay guys, point number 3 is all about gear. Very important in an ultramarathon. Number 1 is your shoes. So you want to make sure you've got the right shoes for the job. You want to make sure you've got a proper pair of running shoes, obviously. It's likely your ultramarathon is going to involve trails, so you probably want to have some trail shoes. Should be at least a model of shoes that you've run with extensively in the past and done a few long runs with, like a marathon. That way you know there's going to be no issues once you're 3 or 4 hours into your run. It doesn't have to be the exact same pair of shoes you've been running in for months. You can buy a new model and then break them in over 5 or 6 runs. You also don't want to run with an old pair of shoes, because after like 400 kilometers or so, every pair of shoes kind of starts to fatigue. They lose their support, they lose their bounce, and they're a bit harder to run with. So you want a good pair of shoes that you're comfortable and familiar with, that are not brand new, they're broken in, but they're not too old. Other things you might want to consider are socks. Definitely consider investing in a decent pair of socks, like in Gingies. Go through your shorts, your shirts, everything you're going to wear, your hat. Make sure you're comfortable running with all this stuff for hours on end. Road test everything in long runs. And then finally, you want to think about your running pack. So depending on how well supported your 100K race is, that depends how much stuff you've got to carry. For me, usually I can get away with a very small pack that's got a 2-liter bladder in the back and a few pockets for gels, my phone, my keys, and stuff like that. So the whole point with gear is it should be gear you're familiar with, gear that's designed for endurance running, and gear that you've tested well. Next point is GPS watch. So you want a GPS device that goes the distance. If you're just into short runs, maybe you can get away with running with your smartphone, or I'm actually wearing 2 watches right now, but the Apple Watch is fine. For me, it tends to last for runs up to around 5 hours and the battery dies. So when you come to ultramarathon training, and specifically ultramarathon running, you really need to buy a GPS watch that you know is going to last in GPS mode for the entire duration of your run. For me right now, it's the Coros Apex. I did a 100K run with it fully charged. And by the time I was finished, it still had 69% battery, so I'm pretty impressed with this thing. There are a bunch of models out there. I'll link below to my page with ultramarathon GPS device recommendations. So basically, same goes for your smartphone, which you'll probably want to take with you. You want to make sure that your GPS watch is fully charged and you know how to put it into the ultra mode. The Coros Apex has something called Ultra Max mode. Basically what it does is it makes GPS sampling less frequently, so the battery life is preserved for longer. So if you're looking for a watch, I definitely recommend the Coros, or you can check out my page below where I have more ultramarathon GPS recommendations. Okay guys, so the next few tips are for runners who are running a traditional 100K race. So it's organized by a group of people and you know the route beforehand and everything like that. So number 1, most important, is you need to study the route. So when I talk about studying the route, I mean you've got to look at the underfoot conditions, the kind of stuff you're going to be running in, the inclinations, any altitude, any climbs, you got to prepare for that. You want to look at normal weather conditions wherever you're going to run at that time of year, so you're prepared. The next thing you want to research with your race is the location of aid stations. So it's typical in a 100-kilometer run to get aid stations every 10 kilometers, but every race is slightly different. So you want to have a really good idea in your head where the aid stations appear, especially if there's going to be a gap of 20 or 30 kilometers between aid stations, so you can prepare. It's really important during an ultra that you know where the aid stations are in case something bad happens and you have to go and find the nearest aid station, which might be the last one that you passed. Second point on aid stations is you want to know exactly what aid stations supply. So as a minimum, the aid stations will give you water, but you'll often find that in ultramarathons and other races, aid stations provide different types of food. It might be chocolate, might be sports drinks, might be gummy bears, might be some fruit. You want to be familiar with this stuff so you can either choose to incorporate it in your nutrition plan or reject it and just live off whatever you're carrying. Final point on aid stations is you want to be aware if there's going to be any medical support at the aid stations. So it's always worth knowing in advance if maybe there's 2 or 3 aid stations along the way that has a medic, just in case the worst happens. Finally, for any organized race, you want to familiarize yourself with all the logistical stuff around the race. That includes the start time, but also any pre-registration stuff you need to do beforehand. You want to know what's going to be at the start line, if there's portaloos. You want to know if there's a bag drop system, especially important if the start line and the finish line are in different locations. Can you drop off a bag at the start line and they'll pick it up at the finish line? Any logistics around transport to the start line or transport at the finish line. Basically, you want to familiarize yourself with all that stuff as early as possible so you can make plans so you don't have any surprises on race day. Okay, so the next few points are all about if you're running some kind of self-organized or virtual 100-kilometer race. Okay, so number one, you're the organizer of this race. You might be running a virtual event which includes hundreds of other people, but for your own personal race, you've got to consider yourself the organizer, which means you're planning the route, you're planning the aid stations, you're planning what you're going to eat, when you're going to stop, what's available. So you've got a lot of freedom here, but also a lot of things you've got to start considering. Let's start with the route. So if you're planning your own 100-kilometer route, which is exactly what I did 5 days ago, I'll give you some tips. One, you want to choose a sort of achievable route. You don't want to make it too easy on yourself. It's not like you should pick a 100-kilometer route which goes downhill the whole way, but you don't want to throw yourself any unnecessary obstacles or hardships. So no need to throw in running up and down a mountain if you're not comfortable doing that, or if you've got doubts about doing it as part of a 100-kilometer race. In other words, you want to pick a route that you know is kind of achievable. The flatter the better. And you also want to think about weather conditions. Okay, so as the personal race organizer, you also need to be thinking about aid stations. Basically, the easiest way to do this is to make your house or a friend's house your aid station, and you can do several loops that always bring you back to the same point. So that's exactly what I did. I ended up coming back home 3 times during my 100K race. So basically, the night before, I prepared a big pot of chili. I also made a bunch of little snacks available, bottles of water, my salts, things like that. I had it all set up, ready to go. So whenever I came in the door, everything I needed was ready. Okay, so one benefit of doing your own race is that you can be flexible with the route. And what I mean by being flexible with the route is you can change it as the day goes on. So why would you change the route? Maybe you've planned in some hills that suddenly you don't feel in the mood to do. Maybe it gets windy, maybe, I don't know what happens. Maybe you've planned to run the same route 3 times, and once you've done it twice, you get bored and you decide you need to mix things up. That actually happened to me 5 days ago. I decided at the last minute to do the last 30K up and down hills because the flat route I was planning, I'd already run it twice that day and it was super boring to think to do it again. So my advice to you, if you're planning a route, is plan your route, but also have options. And it's actually quite easy to do if you're doing loops back to your house, because you can just design 4 or 5 different loops and then give yourself the choice of picking a loop as you go. So the last point on organizing your solo race is basically over-deliver with your aid stations. In other words, anything you want, anything you think you might want, you might as well just get it in. Whether it's Doritos, chocolate, more gels, salts, any weird snack that you like, peanut butter. Your aid station can be limitless, basically. So it's an advantage for someone who's planning their own run, so go ahead and do it. Last point on running a solo 100K or a virtual 100K is you should have support. The support person can just be at home, can be your partner, they can stay at the aid station all the time, or they can be on call basically, but you do need somebody around in case something goes wrong, or just for some support. Maybe they can prepare your meals. You can send them a message when you're 2 minutes out and they can have everything ready for you. Definitely a big boost not to do it completely on your own, but to have somebody looking out for you and checking in with you too. Okay, some quick tips for the week before your 100K run. First thing is you want to prioritize sleep, minimize stress, and cut down, if not cut out, alcohol. All these things are just going to wind your body down. You're going to be better rested, better prepared on race day. Next point is don't be afraid to stock up on carbs. So during your 100K, you're probably going to burn like 7,000 calories. So during this week, don't be afraid of eating an extra meal, eating a little bit more, and just stocking up those glycogen reserves. So on race day, you've got more fuel in the tank. Your final point for the week before is just go through everything. Check out all your gear again, go for short runs with all the gear, run through, rehearse your race day schedule, how things are gonna go, what you're gonna do if things go wrong, who you can call, where you're gonna drop out, whatever. Okay, so the final tips for 24 hours before your race, the night before your race, are as follows. Try and avoid caffeine as much as possible. Maybe you can have 1 in the morning, the day before your race, but otherwise, you might be nervous the night before your race. Caffeine might prevent you from sleeping. It's definitely happened to me a couple of times. So if you can, the day before your race, no caffeine. 2, mentally run through your race day schedule, everything from your transport to starting, to mentalizing you going through the whole route, to the finish line, to getting home again. Walk through every step, what you're going to eat, what you might eat, what your contingency plans are. You just want to be prepared as possible. Final point for 100K preparation is that the night before, you want to lay out everything you're going to use on race day. So basically the idea is you should wake up on race morning, roll out of bed, put on your running gear, which you've already prepared, put on your pack, and you should be ready to go. The last thing you want to do is go to bed thinking about things you've still got to do before you're going to be ready for the race. That way it's going to be playing on your mind all night. Instead, spend an hour or half an hour or 20 minutes, whatever it is, the night before the race, running through everything you need, laying it all out so you can rest easy, and you know in the morning you just have to wake up, slip into your gear, grab your bag or whatever it is, and head out the door and focus on running. Last thing you want is to be waking up on race day and thinking, oh, I need to prepare XYZ. Doesn't work. Instead, do everything the night before. Race day is about running and trying to enjoy yourself, focusing on not screwing up. And that's it, guys. That's how to prepare for a 100K race. Hey guys, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, feel free to subscribe, and you'll get to see more of my stuff. Likewise, you can check out marathonhandbook.com, where I've posted loads of articles. We've got all our free training plans. You can check out our courses, anything you want. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching and enjoy your running.